Welcome to the Off the Track Initiative podcast, the podcast dedicated to bringing a more modern, conscious perspective to the re-educating and rehabilitating of off-the-track thoroughbreds. My name is Kate Moran, ex-thoroughbred racing steward, dressage enthusiast and thoroughbred advocate. Each month I will be sharing with you inspirational stories and knowledge from a variety of professionals who are on a mission to make a difference within the equestrian world. So today I'm having a chat with Tegan Lush from over in Western Australia. Thank you, Tegan, so much for making the time to have a chat about your experience with horses and your eventing career. So a good place to start would be the beginning. So if you'd like to tell us how you got involved in horses to start with.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really cool to be asked to be on the podcast. So I got started in horses because it's a family thing. My grandparents were racehorse trainers and my mum was a jockey. So kind of grew up into it, I guess. I didn't really have any choice.
Yeah, how long was your mum's career as a jockey for?
So mum was a jockey back in the day when women could only ride against women at picnic races or small race meets.
Yep.
And so she never graduated to getting her full racing license because she got told she didn't race ladylike enough.
Oh, wow.
As a rider. I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Because they wanted them to, sit pretty, and mum was a big hands and heels kind of rider.
Yep.
And so they didn't want their elbows flapping and that sort of thing. So her racing career probably wasn't as long as she would have liked it to be, I think, because of that.
Yeah.
But my grandparents trained, for ages and ages and ages until basically they physically couldn't anymore.
Yep, and that's over in WA?
No, in Victoria, actually.
Victoria. Oh, right.
So they were based in Kyneton,
Yep.
and Kilmore areas, and then they moved to Bendigo, and when they were in Bendigo, they didn't do as much active training. They still had young horses coming through that they were sending to other people for training, some more the owner side of it, rather than actively training them. And then they moved from that area to WA, and that's when they stopped.
Okay, cool. Wow. So you've always grown up with thoroughbreds in particular then?
Yes. Yep. Always first started my lead rein on mum's ex-racehorse being led around the paddock.
Oh, wow. And so tell us about your first horse and your first experiences with them that you remember.
So my first pony, he was really naughty. I don't really remember, but I do get told a lot that he was purchased from a garage sale. And his saddle was purchased from the garage sale as well. So he came with a little 14-inch stock saddle.
Yep.
Which I've still got.
Wow.
And he was bay. And I named him Cocoa Pops.
Yep.
Because he was chocolate, and that was my favourite cereal.
Yep.
When I was little. Of course. So don't have no idea what his breeding was or even what his age was or anything, but he was really naughty. I fell off him a lot. But he was a really good first pony. So I had him until I was probably about 9. I started getting lessons from sort of outside the family when I was about 8. And so she had a school pony that I was riding for a bit that I ended up purchasing because dear old Cocoa Pops wasn't very well educated. So trying to get lessons on him for dressage and showing just wasn't working very well. So he was a good little. I always grew up wanting to be the man from Snowy River.
Yep.
So I had my little stock saddle and galloped around the bush flat stick and life is fabulous.
Yeah, it's funny. Everyone seems to have the horses that teach them to stay on, and then the ones that teach them how to ride. Like as well, you need both types of horses in your life. I think when you're growing up. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so then.
Yep, and I used to always ride him like so far from home. So when I fell off, I always had to walk forever to get back to the house. And my nan was so strict on if you ever fell off, you got back on again. You don't let the horse beat you. So if I had to walk all the way back to the house and hop back on, and then I'd go all the way back out again.
And so then from what was your next horse's name? The riding school pony?
So her name was Smudge. Mm-hmm. She was a little Arab Australian pony cross.
Yeah.
So she was the first pony that I took eventing.
Okay.
She was my first hate for Arabs.
Yeah.
I still don't like them to this day because of her.
Yeah, no.
She was gorgeous, very well educated, and a beautiful pony, but just not a jumper. So I took her through Pony Club, and then we started doing low-level eventing.
Yeah.
And she would be leading after dressage by miles and miles and miles, and then I'd get eliminated cross-country, and I'd get permission to show jump, and then I'd get eliminated show jumping as well because she just hated jumping. And then the next event we'd take her out to, she'd be last after dressage, and she'd jump double clear. And she drove me crazy.
Yeah. And so yet even still, was that sort of around the time when you decided eventing was going to be your thing? Or...
Yes.
Yep.
I think growing up with the era of Matt Ryan and Jill Rolton, that was sort of when I was, progressing from in the ponies and starting to get lessons, watching those guys on telly, and just it was such a cultural thing, I think, because of, what Jill had achieved and what the rest of the team achieved at Barcelona and Atlanta, that we all grow up wanting to do that. So I think right from as soon as I started getting lessons, I was like, yep, eventing's exactly what I want to do. Like, I want to be just like Jill. I want to do everything that Jill's done. So it sort of was ingrained in me right from the start. So it's really hard then when you get a pony that decides that she hates jumping with a passion.
So then after her, who was your next horse after that?
So then we moved on to a schoolmaster. Yep. So I can't remember how old he'd be, but he would have been at least 18 when I picked him up, if not a little bit older. So he evented in WA around a couple of their 3-day events and the high levels. Anyone from his era would definitely remember him. His name was Max Almighty, and from a lady called Tori McClarty. Mm-hmm. And so we leased Max as a schoolmaster to learn the ropes on, and he was awesome because he was really good dressage horse, but came with lots of quirks. Yeah. So I'll never forget one of my first events with him. Being an old man who knew his job, trying to get to the start box, he took off up the hill and sort of headed out on course, and I had no control, and I was like, oh my God, what do I do? Am I eliminated because I've gone past jump 1 and haven't even left the start box yet? And I do remember being told, you can have someone lead the horse into the start box for you and hold on to them if you need to. So the old man that he was had to be led into the start box at every event after that. So he was gorgeous, but he reached a point where his legs just didn't, they had so many miles on them already that he wasn't up for the jumping side of things. So when we talked to Tori about it, because we're leasing him, she was really good actually, and so she had one of her younger horses sitting in the paddock doing nothing, who had done a few like low-level 95, 105 sort of events, and she offered him to us as a purchase. Yeah. So he was a little thoroughbred named Jake, and he was so we did end up purchasing him. I had a few rides and really loved him.
Mm-hmm.
He bucked like Billy-O. But it was the kind of bucking where he kept his head up and just kind of bounced along, so you could just sort of sit to it all day.
Yeah.
And he was a windsucker and sort of didn't really have a whole lot going for him, but he was a really good little jumper. So he was probably my first super successful.
Mm-hmm.
So both the horses from Tory were amazing in that, they taught me the ropes. Max was really good at his level, so he only jumped to 80 and sort of once you started to push him past the 80 centimetre height, his legs just didn't cope anymore.
Yeah.
But even at that height, we were pretty successful together. And he definitely taught me a lot. Mm-hmm. And then, moving on to Jake was awesome because it's a completely different kind of horse. He was young and sprightly and more excited about his job rather than knowing what his job was.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to be able to be offered those rides from such an experienced eventer from WA.
Yeah. And so how old were you roughly at this stage when you moved on to Jake?
Oh, about 13 or 14, I reckon.
So then
would have been about like year 8, year 9 in high school.
Yep.
So that was sort of, still had the eventing bug. Was still going to pony club with Jake.
Mm-hmm.
I did a little bit. He wasn't so big on the group scenarios. The bucking sort of got worse and worse at pony club. So he was. I did like my C and C star with him, and that was as far as we went.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jake got me through to 105, and quite successfully. Like I had a few wins with him. Feel like we went a long way,
mm-hmm.
but he was quite little, very compact, and trying to push him past. I think I got a few 1-star runs in, mm-hmm. but trying to push him any higher than that, it was just out of his scope. And so my coach at the time just sort of said, like, if you want to keep going, you need a better horse than this, essentially.
Yeah.
And he sort of reached his limit, and, maybe that's where he might be better suited to someone else so that he stays within his limits.
Yeah.
And I'd done so much with him already success-wise. Like, we won some leaderboards. We won a lot of the junior 105s that we were in.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd done a couple of 1-stars, which is now 2-star.
Yeah.
And you just sort of had to pick and choose the courses just because he wasn't super scopy. So it was at the end of that year that we went, okay, maybe we'll start looking.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I sold him to a adult rider who loved him until the day he died, which was it was really nice because she took him around the level of eventing, and they had a really nice relationship together, which was super. Couldn't ask for a better home. And then so we looked at lots and lots and lots of horses, and we actually ended up purchasing a thoroughbred from Sonia Johnson,
mm-hmm.
who Sonia had taken to Adelaide, and he was a very large, very strong thoroughbred.
Mm-hmm.
And so initially we went to Adelaide as spectators and watched him compete, and Sonia had him up. She had 2 horses up for sale at that point in time. And we asked her about him, and she said, no, like, he's not suited for a young rider. He's really strong. He gets a bit hot. Like, he's not really what you're looking for. But after sort of a couple of months of looking, post Adelaide, we ended up saying to her, well, we'll come have a ride of the 2 horses that you've got and see how we go. And I never forget Sonia saying to me sort of, if you buy this horse, you'll win blue ribbons and do very well. Or if you buy this other horse, you're going to learn how to ride.
Yeah, okay.
And so we went with the other horse.
Yeah.
Which was the very strong, very large, very hot
mm-hmm.
Thoroughbred. So he was by Reversion, who himself I think was quite tall, and then he was out of a Jungle Boy mare. So always sort of in thoroughbred blood, bred for not having much of a brain.
Yeah.
We called him Andy. So Sonia entered him as foreign exchange.
Okay.
And I remember discussing with Sonia at the time of changing his name, his competition name, just to make it more of he became my competition horse rather than being associated with having bought a horse off Sonia.
Yeah.
To help our results sort of stand out on their own. And so we changed his name to Anastasi, which is a Navajo word, because he was he was a big, tall, lean chestnut with not an ounce of white hair on him, who not the prettiest soul around. So I kept him for a long time, and he turned out to be a really good horse. He was very strong cross country, and long. Like, he was quite, for me being a smaller rider, he would easily have been 17 hands, if not taller.
Wow.
So very tall, not massive around the barrel, but very tall and very long, like very long in the neck. Just a big horse. And so he could really gallop, and could really move. Like, medium trot was his favourite stress relief ever. So when you get to a show and he starts to get a bit anxious, he just starts doing his medium trot everywhere, and he's sort of holding on for dear life, going, please stay in the arena. But yeah, dear Andy, he was a very cool horse, and quite a nervous introvert as well, which seemed so odd for such a large animal. Like, he would get very nervous travelling. He would scramble a little bit if he went with another horse, just things like that. But yeah, Andy was probably my first super duper successful horse. He took me through my first 2-star, which is now 3-star. So took me through my first 3-star, and then he took me to my first 4-star as well, which was amazing. Like, never thought we'd ever get that far. He was really good. So he wasn't a great fan of drops. So once you got to that 4-star level, he got a little bit challenging to ride cross country. Same thing, you just sort of pick and choose the courses you were doing. But in terms of all my young rider stuff, jumping around the 3-star classes and doing all the young rider classes and getting on state squads and having access to those kind of coaches, he was definitely my first horse that got me to that point. And learnt a lot with him, and I got to have lessons with Jill through the squads, which was really awesome. And it sort of like started ticking goals away, which he was really cool. But so we still have Andy. He is retired at my sister's farm at the moment, and he would be about 26.
Wow.
He's really, really old. And he ended up with arthritis in his hocks quite bad. So he sort of scuffs around the paddock down in Margaret River, living a life of luxury at the moment. But so that sort of ended up being the end of his career. He got quite ill towards the end, so we ended up doing a colic surgery with him, and he just never really fully recovered from the surgery. So post-surgery wasn't quite the same horse, and we had a few injuries here and there, and he actually ended up getting liver failure. So at an event, he was just really off colour and not quite himself, and we thought, this is something not quite right here. And I remember I didn't run him cross country, and we took him to the vet, and the vet said, oh my God, like, he's got jaundice. His gums were yellow, his eyes were yellow. And they were like, you need to go to the vet hospital, like, straight away. So he, after that, that's when we sort of backed off and went, okay, his body's just not coping with being at a high level anymore. And so we tried leasing him out to some younger riders coming through, but being a big horse, the nerves got to him a little bit, and a difficult traveller. He didn't stay in a leased home. It was hard to find him a compatible home. So that's when I just said, he's done amazing things. And my sister actually rode him for a bit. So because even though he was strong and he'd get a bit nervous, he was super duper safe. So he never bucked or reared, or he was never naughty like that. So my sister used to take him for trail rides, and he'd pull her arms out by the end of it. But so he's still with her now, which is really nice.
Yeah. So what were some of the sort of tactics or things that you'd adopt then? Because I mean, it's not uncommon with thoroughbreds, and especially the big chestnut ones, to have the nervousness and the tension. So what were some of the methods you do to manage that when you'd take him out and compete him, and just in general everyday life?
So we're going to sound a little bit crazy, but Andy had his own float.
Yeah. Okay.
So he couldn't go with another horse because that made him. We tried one day, and I remember trying, and I think we made it like about 5 kilometres from home before he went absolutely berserk in the float, and more worried that he would hurt the other horse. So he ended up having his own float, which we got sort of custom made to give him a bit more room and help him cope with his travelling a bit better. So he always went in his own float, and if we took more than one horse to something, then we had to take a second car, which was all before I had my license, so quite difficult. Yeah. So often Andy went to things by himself. Yeah. And we did a lot of work with his dressage in terms of just tweaking the warm-up and trying to work out what suited him best. And so we ended up in a routine where he would get ridden beforehand to a point where he would start to get quite tense. So you'd start to run through the movements, and you'd warm him up to a point where he'd start to get quite tense, and then just sort of drop your reins and leave it, take him back to the float, let him chill. And then my warm-up before my test was literally around the arena. Yeah, so we'd go back to the float, have a drink, I get changed into the competition gear, and then I'd go back out and just walk around on a long rein until the horse before me was going down the centre line, and then I'd pick him up and start trotting, and then we'd just trot around the arena and go in and do our test. Straight in. And people thought I was crazy, but it worked for him. And so, and he, by that stage, he knew all the movements. He could do all the, he had all the buttons. It was just a matter of not letting the atmosphere overwhelm him. And because he was such an introvert, he'd sort of hold his breath until the point where he couldn't hold his breath anymore, and then he'd explode, rather than just showing you right from the start how he was feeling. So it did take us a long time, and we used to do lots of work at home on a long, loose rein because getting him, because he was so naturally long, trying to get him short was really hard. And so if you put too much pressure on him at home, even trying to get him shorter, he struggled a little bit. So you'd run through doing all your buttons, so like the canter to halt, and then your simple changes through walk. All of that was like done almost sort of one-handed on the buckle, just to give him the confidence that he could do those movements without feeling cramped up, I guess, or claustrophobic. Which I think really helped him then when you got to a show and you could just kind of take the pressure off a little bit. He'd go, oh, this kind of feels like home. And so it was a really hard routine to get used to because, as a rider, we really want to go out there and make sure we can run through the test before we go in and do the test. And it was a very hard thing for me to get used to as a rider, but it's all about sort of trying to work out what works for him best. So, and then cross country, because he was so strong, it was a matter of sort of working out what gear he liked. And we did work out quite early on that he wasn't a great fan of metal bits. So we used a lot of the Happy Mouth plastic ones on him and just sort of tweaked and played with different combination settings. And that always seemed to work. And then trying to use some events like the smaller runs as your training runs, where you could just kind of trot out of the start box and let him just breathe a little bit, and then save for when you want to make time for another event. And so that seemed to really help him.
Okay, so it's really just sort of about treating each one of them as individuals and then finding out what works for that horse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just such a long, slow process.
Yeah, it sounds it. And I mean, yeah, some are a lot quirkier than others. And it's, you really have to think outside the box, obviously, with some of them, and go outside your own comfort zone to find they're comfortable. So, yeah. And then when you were 16, you went over to the States and spent some time over there?
Yes. So I got onto a show jumping coach named Ian Sillett. So he used to come to Perth. Rory Hovell from Yallambee Farms. He spent a lot of time with Ian in the States living over there. And when Rory moved back, he was getting Ian. Actually, I don't think Rory had moved back, but his mum was getting Ian to come over and do coaching for sort of 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And so I'd been to Ian a few times, and then I was at a stage where I still had Jake, and we just purchased Andy, so I had the 2 horses. And Jake was my first horse that I took to Ian, actually, and he was fabulous. But that just the things, it sort of opened a whole new world, because his method of coaching was really different, and because it came from the American hunter jumper position, so like your light seat, not a lot of rein contact, not a lot of leg, and just letting the horse find its own balance and its own rhythm, which I think is really suited to the thoroughbreds, because influencing them too much, you sort of take away from what their natural balance is. But yeah, Ian was fabulous, and so we reached a point where I was getting so many lessons in Perth, it was actually almost cheaper for me to fly over there. Wow. So at the end of year 11, once I'd finished TE exams, I flew over there and did a month, which was amazing. So he's based in Ocala, Florida, and just, it was incredible working with the horses every day. And Ian had come out and sort of give each rider a list of horses of who was riding who for that day. And so you'd go through all the barn duties in the morning, and then ride horses, and then sort of do barn duties in the afternoon. And so Ian did a lot of coaching. He didn't do a whole lot of riding himself, but he was always there, which was really nice. And so I got put on so many different horses, and I loved it. So at the end of year 12, I went back again. So I skipped my levers completely. So I was so horse addicted. I was like, don't need a levers party. I'm going to go to America. So I went back there and stayed over Christmas and into January. Wow. And so that's sort of their off season, and the shows like just start to pick up around January again. And I had to cut my trip short as my grandfather was sick. So I flew home a little bit earlier than expected. And then I talked to Ian about going back again for a bit longer and doing the competition circuits, going back in like June, July, and going with them through shows and just seeing what that world is like. Because over November to January, it's sort of a lot about at home training, just ticking horses over. Like, it's not very intense work, and you don't get a lot of insight as to how the shows run. And so so after year 12, on my year off, I went back over there through it's like June to August roughly, and we did the show circuit up and down the East Coast, which was really cool, like so different. So I ended up going back and forth over there quite a few times.
Yeah, wow. It sounds like a great experience, and it would have been a huge learning curve. And what was sort of the main things you took away from that differs in America that they do compared to here in Australia?
Lots. Ian didn't have an arena, so we rode in what he called a field, which in Australia we call a paddock, which was literally like the horses lived in that paddock overnight, and he rotated them depending on how much wear and tear they were getting, but one of them was literally on the side of a hill, and so you sort of you had jumps like up and down up the hill, and it was quite different to being on very flat, manicured arenas that we've got in Australia, which was quite nice. And then a lot of the time, I think it was sort of my first experience with owners, because Ian had over 30 horses in his barn, and he only owned a handful. And so owners who weren't able to be there and ride them all the time, and it was a lot about riding them during the week was just about exercising and maintaining what the horses got rather than necessarily changing their level of education.
Okay.
And I think that was a big learning curve for me, because Ian was like, you know, you're not here to make the horse the next amazing Grand Prix golf medalist. You're here to keep it exercise for the rider, because if we don't want to make the horse too difficult, and then the rider can't ride them. And that was a really big learning curve, because it sort of brought the enjoyment back into riding, because when if you're having a bad day, you can just go back and go, okay, I'm just here to help exercise you and just chill a little bit, and then deal with it again tomorrow. And so I always remember that, because he had a Grand Prix horse that had got a bit of a fright and had then gone to a lady who had really severe celiacs, and so she was quite a slight person, and they always said, like, you know, you just hold his hand, exercise him, and keep him happy, so that when the owner comes to ride, he's not too much horse for her. And don't get him too upset about jumping. We want to keep him just really calm and mellow, so that she's got a nice horse to ride. Which was quite, you know, for a young person, I found that quite different. Because I was all about wanting to train hard and go big and do it all bigger and better every day. And that was a really cool experience.
To just take the pressure off, I guess, and have a different way of riding. So,
exactly. So it's another about having another tool to suit the horse that you've got.
And then, so coming home, what was that like when you came back? Did you still have Andy in work?
Yes. So I competed Andy up until before we went over to do the competition circuit, and then when I got home from the competition circuit, I think at the start, it must have been at the start of that year, or maybe just a little bit before then, we purchased Murphy. So I sort of got home from the competition circuit like itching to ride my own horses. The comp circuit I found really hard, because a lot of the other girls that were working there had their own horses with them and were doing the comps as they were working, whereas I was like the only one there just purely working and riding sort of every now and then, and that made me like really itchy to get home and work my own horses. When I got home, that was when we sort of started to pump up a little bit more with Andy, and then I had Murph just straight off the track. And so did a lot of the stuff that I did with Ian early on. Like Murph used to get ridden out in the paddock instead of on the arena, and doing the same. Ian used to always have an exercise set up in his paddock of 3 poles in a row, 5 strides apart, and you just cantered on down there, just letting the horse find their own rhythm. And he was very much about them being able to canter by themselves, and it's such a good exercise for young horses off the track, because they're not used to being allowed to canter at their own pace. They've always been told what to do. And so I do remember riding Murph out in a paddock as baby horse, just doing lots and lots and lots of that exercise. So when we got back, that was sort of Andy on his way down to retirement. And then Murph trying to put into place everything that I'd learned coming through.
So with Murphy, so how did you find him? What made you take him off the track? What did he have? What was it about him?
I can still remember the day that I rode Murph. We had been looking for a young horse, and I wasn't living in Perth at the time. We were down on the farm, and so we drove to Perth with Mum, and we did a full day. Like, I think we looked at about 5 horses, and Murph was the last horse on the way home. And like all the horses I'd looked at, I was like, they're nice, but nothing's jumping out at me. And so by the time we got to where Murph was, I was just like, I can't be bothered, Mum. Like, I'm like, all these horses, you know, they're so much. It's just not, I just don't like any of them. Like, I was like, do we have to look at one more? And she's like, yeah, we're here. Come on, let's do it. I was like, all right. And then, and, sorry. Dogs. And I never forget getting there, and he was in quite a big stud, so there was lots and lots of babies everywhere. But he was a little bit cheeky and quirky to tack up, and I was like, oh, this guy's kind of cute, like he's got a bit of personality about him. But then to ride, he was just a real gentleman. Okay. So he did everything I asked, and he just took it all on board, and kept his ears on me the whole time, and was just like, yep, let's do it. I'll do exactly everything that you're after. And I do remember, riding him and going, oh my God, this horse tries like really hard. I'm like, yeah, he's pretty cool. And I think they had about $3,500 or $4,000 on him. And so at the end of the ride, we ended up going, you know what? Here's $1,000. Take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we'll think about it. And then, yeah, said yes.
Wow. That's all right then. So do you remember his race name or?
Yeah, so his race name, when we went and looked at him, his name was Scooter.
Yeah.
And I remember going, oh my God, that's a terrible name for a horse. His racing name was It's So Easy.
Okay.
And we got him home, and I thought, I've just bought a 3-year-old off the track that I want to take eventing. And I was like, his race name is It's So Easy. And I thought, I can't call an eventer It's So Easy in case we get him eventing and it's not so easy. I'm like, what if he doesn't jump? What if he doesn't like it? Because that was always my thoughts was, we can't call him It's So Easy because if it's not so easy, I'm going to look like an idiot. Yeah. Which it's really funny, ironically, now, looking back at it, because it turned out that it was so easy. Yeah. And if we'd stuck with that name, like it would have been such an arrogant instead of, oh my God, what if it's not so easy? It's like oh yes, it definitely was.
Yeah, it was.
So it made me laugh that it was just perfect for him all over. Yeah. But he was a terrible racehorse, so I don't know why they called him It's So Easy.
It's always the way though, isn't it? So how did you progress him, and what was his sort of story moving up the grades? Because he moved up the grades quite quickly.
He moved up the grades really quickly, and now that I've got other young horses coming through, and I look back at it and I go, oh my God, like at your age, dude, Murph's at Adelaide. It was ridiculous, but he just literally found it easy, and he started competing the year that EI happened. Mm-hmm. And so we missed a lot of events through the middle of the year, and then November, December, they ran shows when they normally wouldn't have. So he did his first events then, and he did 2 80 centimetres in November and December, and I don't think he even placed or anything, but he found the jumping really easy and just did the job. And then at the start of the following year, I was like, he doesn't need to do another 80. It was really easy. And so he did 195. And I said to my mum, I was like, if he does, can I go up a grade? And she was like, you can't go up a grade unless you win it. And of course he won it. And so then, which I think she was like, shouldn't have said that. So then he went straight to 105. And he did 3 105s, which was what you needed to, your minimum eligibility in order to then go 1 star, which is now 2 star. Mm-hmm. And so he did his 3 105s. I was still in the juniors then, and then went straight through to 1 star, which is now 2 star, and he placed at a couple of those. And then I had a few control issues cross country. Mm-hmm. So by that stage, he sort of worked out what his job was and started to get really keen. And so we had a bit of a break over that summer, so that October would have been his last event, and then he had a bit of a break, and then figured a few things out, and then the following year came back in, and he did I think he did 1 more 1 star. Our 3-day in Perth used to run in May, which was really good timing. So he did the 1/2 star. I'm still getting used to the new grading.
Yep.
at the 3-day event, and finished sort of top 10. And then, went straight to 2-star. And so I think he did the next 3 or 3-star, went to that level, did the next 3 events. And I remember at the end of, we've got an event in September, which is always on the same weekend in September. And I finished the show jumping and I came out of it and I went, oh my God, we're qualified to go to Adelaide.
Yeah.
And I said to Mum, I was like, can we go? And she was like, okay, I think so. And so, he was 6, which is ridiculous. So I got him off the track as a 3-year-old. And, so it was the following year. He then did some 80s. And then as a 5 turning 6-year-old, he just punched straight on through.
Yeah.
And, it's just, I look back at it now and just can't fathom how, as a 6-year-old, he then went to Adelaide. And, Adelaide's it's a big event. Like, it's not, it's a big atmosphere. And so it was while they were still doing the renovations at the racecourse. And so all the dressage for the lower heights was over on the oval across the road. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have the atmosphere for the dressage like they do now. It was quite different. We were sort of in the background with no crowds, no TVs, nothing around us, which was probably a really good introduction for a young horse. But, he went to his first Adelaide that year as a 6-year-old and finished 11th.
That's a huge effort.
Which out of such a big field.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's like, it was my first Adelaide, our first time driving across the Nullarbor. We went with a Prado and a little double Olympic float with swags on the roof, wheelie bins in the horse bay next to Murph, which we've still got a wheelie bin that he chewed to smithereens on the way home. Yeah. And we've still got it because it's Murph's Adelaide wheelie bin. Yeah. It's crazy. And then the following year we then made it onto the young rider teams, which was really awesome. Mm-hmm. So in April that year they ran the Trans-Tasman, and the Trans-Tasman that year ran in Christchurch. So he got selected along with some other girls from WA, which was really cool. So it was nice to have 2 other girls on the team who I knew, and we'd been competing against each other, and made it a really nice feel. But so we packed up our Prado and our little 2-horse float and our swags on the roof and drove to Sydney.
Wow.
It was really cool. We drove that year that we drove to Sydney. There was the plagues everywhere. So there was a mouse plague in Ceduna, and we ended up getting mice in our swags that made it all the way to Sydney. So I look back now and go, oh, how did we do that? But Murph was being as quirky as he is. He had a lot of separation anxiety, and not just from other horses. So travelling across the Nullarbor with him, we'd have to put swags next to his yard, and someone had to stay with him 24/7 because he just, as soon as the first stop that we had overnight, we sort of both went to walk up to the barbecues together and have dinner, and he just absolutely flipped his lid. And so, the poor guy, he was just, I think he thought we were just leaving him there and never coming back. The look on his face was priceless. But so we ended up staying, one of us had to stay with him the whole time. And so it made for quite difficult travelling. It's not overly relaxed when you've got to keep your swag next to their yard the whole way. But, it was pretty cool as a sort of, he would have been 7 turning 8. He was getting flown to New Zealand. So, which is just crazy to be on an Australian team.
Yeah, you've certainly covered quite a few Ks with your eventing career. Because I've been following you on social media for quite a long time, and when you come over to Adelaide, I always see the corgis getting packed up, and you travel in a bit more style now, though. So yeah. So then, how did he go when he was over there in Christchurch?
Christchurch was awesome. It was such a good learning experience. It was really cool. Like, I'm so grateful to have. That Equestrian Australia does that for the young riders, because it just really gives you an insight into what it's like in a team environment and the things that you need. Like, the riders didn't stay with the horses. So it was really hard for me I had my swags, tied to Murph's yard on the way over to then get to New Zealand, and all of a sudden the grooms lived on site, but the riders had, we got shuttled backwards and forwards in a bus each day. And I was just like, but oh my God, well, who's going to check on him? And luckily, the groom that I took with me is a really good friend, and she'd groomed for Sonia Johnson as well. So she knew the team environment really well, and she was a huge support, which was really good. That helped heaps. But the cross-country course in New Zealand was like nothing we'd ever seen. I remember going out to walk the course for the first time as a whole team, so all of us riders and the coach and we were all together, and all the grooms, and leaving the start box we were all chatting and happy and like teenagers talking really loudly, and all over the top of each other. And I reckon by the time we got to about jump 10, it was like silence. And it was like that for like the rest of the course, because we were like, holy crap, what are these guys jumping? Like, it was ridiculous. I remember some of the fences, we were just like, that's not possible. Like, how? And so I got sent out as the first rider. I think they thought, put a good jumping horse out first, like Murph was bold and strong, and let him jump around, see how it go. And unfortunately, it was one of those live and learn experiences. But we got to about, I think it would have been about fence 6 or 7. They had a bounce step up, so we had to jump up a bank, bounce over a skinny hedge, and Murph way overjumped the skinny hedge by a long, long way, and ended up jumping me off. So I had a long walk home, which was really gutting, because it would have been nice to have got around the rest of the course on him. But yeah, we've got the photos of that jumper, hilarious, because he's just so high in the air. And we sort of came down. I came down a little bit to the right of him, and it was almost like he sort of jumped sideways and was like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, why don't you on me still? Like, come on, go with it. But yeah, so that was really heartbreaking. That's sort of how the trip ended.
Part of the game,
but
isn't it?
I've only fallen off Murph twice in the whole time that I've owned him, and that was one of them. So
Wow. That's pretty impressive considering everything you achieved with him. So then coming back, he just kept progressing and going up the grades, and you ended up doing a 4-star at Adelaide, which is now 5-star.
Yep.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was really good. So I came back from that, and our coach in New Zealand was Prue Barrett, who ended up also progressing on to being the coach for the senior team. And I do remember talking to her and going like, oh, I think, I'm ready to go up a grade. Like when I get home, I want to do Sydney 3-day. Do you think I'm ready to go up a grade? And I remember her saying like, no, I think you'd probably just get a few more miles under your belt. So I spent the rest of that year at that 2, now 3-star level. So he did Sydney when we got home from New Zealand. I stayed and did the Sydney 3-day event and just went around the 2-star there, which was the weekend of World Cups it used to be. So that was really good because I had the high level show jumping as well. So he did that and sort of finished in the top 10, and then went home back to WA and just ticked around our 2 3-stars. And then in October, I ran around our first 3, now 4-star on him. And he won that, which was really awesome. And then I said, I want to go back to Adelaide. I want to do the Young Rider again and try and do, my goal was to finish top 3. So at the end of that year, we went back to Adelaide again, for so that would have been his second run around the 2 3-star. And yeah, ended up winning the Young Rider, which was just crazy. Yeah. He was just amazing. That trip was really good. It was such a good trip. So it was one of those trips where all the plans just fell into place. Yeah. Like everything just ran like clockwork. And it was awesome. So he ended up finishing second overall to Chris Burton. Wow. Which back then I was just kind of like, oh yeah, Chris Burton's kind of cool. Whereas now I'm like, oh my God, I finished second to Chris Burton. And he was the first horse to show jump clear, which I didn't know. So I remember my warm up being very like, in WA we only had sort of 8 to 10 competitors in a field. Mm-hmm. And so I was very strict that I went, okay, I never warm up before our class started, and so I'm only used to having sort of 8 horses as my warm up. So I didn't want to hear results. I didn't go and watch. I just went, I'm going to wait here until I've got about 8 horses to go. Then I'm going to hop on and warm up and try and make it as normal as possible. And so I had no idea that he jumped clear, and like the crowd went crazy, and I was like, oh yeah, it was a really good round, fabulous, yay, thank you. But I had no idea that he was the first clear round, and that's why everyone was going crazy. So it was really cool. But yeah, and then from there he went and did Melbourne 3-day the following year. Did a couple of other Sydney 3 days, and then we had a few like control issues cross country to work out. And so once he'd had a few 3-4 star 3 days under his belt, you know, I chatted to a lot of people, and it was like, I really want to do the 5-star this year. Like, what are your thoughts? And same thing, I got a lot of feedback on, you know, just get a little bit more consolidated at that level first. And so I went, all right, then no worries, I'll do it the year after. And so the first year that he went was a bit of a disaster. So my first Adelaide experience was one of those trips when nothing went right. And we travelled across the Nullarbor in somebody else's float, which is really common for WA. Like, it sounds quite foreign, but we often always carpool because it's nice to have company. It's nice to share the costs with someone, that sort of thing. And so I went over, it was our vehicle with their float, and it was just one of those trips that was just a disaster. And Murph had done something travelling, and we're not sure if it was because it was a float that he wasn't familiar with, but by the time he got there, he wasn't 100% sound. And so a lot of the lead up before the event was management at just trying to make it through the first trot up. And like, I wasn't allowed to trot, definitely no jumping and all of that. And so it got, you know, quite stressful, because all of a sudden your plans for your big first competition at that level are all thrown out the window because you're trying to manage, you know, these minor injuries. And so I ended up retiring cross country because I think after having that lead up of 10 days of no jumping, no cantering, just, you know, walking only, lots of hand walking, or lots of that sort of stuff, he got out on course and was just like, oh my God, yes, we're jumping. And he's like, yay. And then ended up over jumping everything. It was just, you know, he was jumping really well, but it wasn't like him. And so from the outside, people probably would have said, yeah, he looks fantastic. But to me, I knew that he wasn't jumping fantastically. And a few fences before the second water were what we'd call let-up fences. So, you know, something a bit smaller where you could sort of have a breather. And I remember he jumping them really poorly. And I thought, oh God, this doesn't feel like him. Like, this is meant to be a breather. You're not meant to falter on these types of fences. And so then as he came through the second water, it was like he just went, I've just got to use speed to get through, because he's such a horse that will always find the flags, and so he's always got to find a way to get the job done. And so I actually retired at that second water and walked home from there, because I was like, this is not right. And I was like, this is a great way to finish your first big 5-star event. I was like, oh, it's so disappointing. But that's what you get when you travel from WA. We're a long way away. And sometimes it just doesn't go to plan, and that's horses. So we went home, gave him a little bit of time off and let him chill out, went back and did Melbourne the following year, and then I went, like, I'm going to go back to Adelaide and get the job done. And that was 2014. And he won every 4-star event that he did in 2014. So every event in WA, he won it. And I was just like, this is nuts. Like, you sort of reach a point where you go, God, I think I'm getting lucky here. Like, this is crazy. But I put in a lot of hard work and used a lot of the smaller events as training runs. So places where you could try something new, you know, making him trot out of the start box and just be like, dude, just chill. We're just going to canter around this course, and we're not going to go fast, and we're not going to make time. And did a lot of going out on course without a watch on, just to really ride the feel rather than go as fast as you can, and saving that for when we had our 3 or 4 star runs, that I could then go, okay, now you can go a bit faster, which I think really helped. So that then when we went to Adelaide, I actually went and stayed at a lady's place. I hadn't been there before, but I'd heard it was really good. And she was up in Gawler, up that direction, at the Kersbrook Equestrian Centre, and she was amazing, and her facilities were fabulous, but it was very quiet and secluded, and it was actually really nice. And I think it sort of worked for how interesting Murph's personality is, in that, like, he's very needy and he's very clingy and he doesn't work well in a busy environment. And so that turned into one of those trips where I think everything sort of started to go right, because he got there and he was in a stable block and he was the only horse that was stabled there, and he was happy as Larry because he could see us, and it just sort of, I don't know, just kind of worked. But that was his best Adelaide run. And so I remember getting the draw, and I was the first horse to go, and I thought, oh my God, I'm the first horse to go across country. I was like, I don't know. Well, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. And Sonia at the time said to me, like, it's great because you won't be influenced by how anyone else rides it. So you have to ride it all your own. Like, you know your job, you know your horse, like, make it your own. And yeah, it was a really tough track. So, there were a few combinations, especially early on, that I know a lot of people were keen to watch how it rode. And yeah, Murph ended up, there was me and the other girl from WA were the only 2 riders that took the straight routes everywhere. So we didn't do any of the options. Everyone else sort of ended up doing the options, which was really awesome. And yeah, he showed up really well the next day, and we sort of finished in the top 6, which was crazy.
That's amazing.
But it just, I mean, that's one of those cross-country runs that I'll just never forget, because he was so on song and just wanting to do the job, and just, you know, you jump into a combination and go, oh, I'm not quite sure how this rides, and he'd be like, it's all right, I got it, I know where the flags are, we're good. Which you just, I don't know if I'll ever be able to feel that on another horse, but yeah, it was pretty cool. And so then from there we, you know, I went, cool, all right, well, I've got my big Adelaide completion under my belt. I want to go back and do it again.
Yeah.
And so it was a couple of years before we went back, and he went back again and finished in the top 6. So
that wasn't the year that a dog came out on course, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, 'cause I do remember that year.
And that's, I credit the corgis to that, because my corgis have a lunging obsession.
Okay, yep.
And so whenever I lunge the horses, they always run the opposite direction and sort of bark when you cross paths.
Yep.
And Murph's he's a very good horse to lunge, but he was just very, dogs, whatever. You guys are in my way. Just keep barking. I'm not going to react. And on being on course, I remember hearing a lot of commotion. Like, I could hear people yelling and that sort of thing, but I had no idea that there was a dog behind me. Yeah. And the first thing that went through my mind was when I heard people yelling, I went, oh, well, there's someone out there that doesn't like Murph. And you just sort of keep focused and get on with the job. And I got back and they were like, oh my God, that dog. And I was like, what dog? And I actually had to watch footage of it because I had no idea that dog was behind me. So, I mean, it was lucky that nothing happened, but at the same time, I guess it's one of those things, isn't it? That dogs come to horse shows and just got to deal with everything.
But it's lucky the corgis had done their job, because I remember watching you around that year and he just didn't miss a beat. And if it had, you know, another horse that wasn't as composed or, used to it, he just kept on his job. But it was good learning curve, I think, for everyone about, hanging on to your dogs.
Hanging on to your dogs. Yeah, I think so. I think that poor lady, whoever's dog it was, oh my God, I feel so sorry for her.
Absolutely.
But I guess at least it was a good horse for it to happen to, because he just, like I said, I had no idea that there was a dog on course. I just thought, I just heard a commotion
Yeah.
and didn't really think much of it. And I mean, it's Adelaide, it's open to the public. You're
Yeah.
getting on horsey people, so you get commotions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like I remember walking the course one year at Adelaide, and there was a group of guys all sort of standing on top of one of the wagons singing African music, and they had drums, and they were having the best party ever.
Yeah.
But I was like, only in Adelaide would you see that while you're walking a cross country course.
Yeah. Oh, you get all sorts. And so
Yep.
now, so Murphy's retired now, and he's still at home with you.
Yes, Murph is retired and driving me completely crazy. So Murph was one of those horses who, he had a lot of miles at the high level for a very long time. And so soundness-wise, he's still actually 100%. Starting to show wear and tear, but we never had anything that went, I think we've got to retire him because he's not going to stay sound if he keeps doing this. It just got to a point where my relationship with him started to expire.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very high maintenance kind of person. And so I would sort of give him a little bit of time off and then just go, maybe I'll take him around a few shows. And then I'd be like, I hate him. And then I'd be like, okay, I'll give him a bit of time off. And I'm like, no, I miss riding Murph. I'll take him to another show. And then I'm like, why am I doing this? And so it sort of went backwards and forwards like that for probably a year.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm done. I don't really want to ride him. I'm like, I'll keep him ticking over because I didn't mind riding him at home, and I still jumped him, and because he could jump the big fences, so keep my eye in and keep my confidence level high. And then I was like, he really needs to go. He's still got more to give. It'd be nice if we could find a young rider who is able to handle all of his quirkiness, and get him to teach them something. And so went through the process of trying to find him a good home. And which we eventually did, and so he went to a young rider for about 6 months, but learning experience for Murph. He was very good until he wasn't, and then I think he's very smart, so he said, I know my job better than you know your job. And they reached a point where their relationship ended as well. And she said, I'm not enjoying jumping this horse anymore. And I was like, yep, that's fine. So when he came back from that, I was like, it'd be nice if we could find someone who wanted to keep riding him. But because he is a bit quirky and everything else, I mean, you know what? He's done his job.
Yeah.
So he's still here with me because he's not the kind of horse that would retire out in a herd of 20 other horses and live a happy life. That's not. He still wants to be rugged. He still wants to have his feet done. He still wants to be fed twice a day. Yeah. He still wants to think he's amazing. And he actually came to a show last weekend as babysitter for my 2 young horses. And because I don't like taking just 2 by themselves, so I always like to take like 1 or 3 just to stop any separation anxiety issues. And Murph was worst behaved. And it was quite funny on Sunday morning. He was like, I can't possibly eat breakfast. Can't possibly eat breakfast. It's cross-country day, and we don't eat breakfast before cross-country. Yeah. And he's standing in his yard holding his breath. And I was like, Murph, you haven't been ridden for 6 months, buddy. But it's so funny how they know their job. So, Murph's living a very, very happy retirement. Yep. He's actually ended up with Cushing's disease. Okay. So, this year is the first year in his whole life that he hasn't been clipped, and he looks like a little billy goat, which he's loving. He used to get clipped about 3 or 4 times a year, which luckily, he was good to clip, but I think it's the first year that he hasn't been clipped, and he loves it because he doesn't have to wear a rug unless it's raining, and he just thinks that's fabulous. So he's living a very happy retirement at the moment, even though it's driving me crazy.
Well, that's good, and it's also a credit to you in how you keep your horses and how sound, because I know you do a lot of work with reset and a lot of body work and physio for them. And do you think, especially when they come off the track, the work that they do as race horses and at such a young age, like you do have, and I guess with eventing as well, you really have to be on top of maintaining them?
Yeah, definitely. You've got to have a really good team around you. Nancy from Reset has worked with me for a long, long time, and she's definitely been with Murph since I got him. And Murph had a really good farrier who, went above and beyond trying to figure out what worked for him. My vet, who I still use, which is Warwick Vale, really took into account Murph's quirkiness, because that horse is he's very tough. And so I think coming off the track, he didn't have a lot of wear and tear, and conformationally, he's not fabulous. He does have, a club foot and a flat foot, and he paddles a little bit with a flat foot. So, and he's a roarer, so he doesn't tick all the boxes, but I think he's got a really good base and a really good foundation. And what I really like with off the track horses is that they've lived a lot of life. So when you get them off the track, they've seen lots of things and they can cope with a lot more, I think. And if they've got a good structural foundation, they're such tough horses to work with, thoroughbreds. Like, they just keep on going.
Yeah.
They really do. I've purchased other young horses. One other young horse that I purchased, he was bred and broken in on the same stud. And when I got him, he had never seen a person on a push bike before and was absolutely terrified. And I just thought, this is something that you just don't go through with the off the tracks, because they've seen everything.
Yeah.
And so, it's definitely a unique horse, I think, in that they have a lot of ups, and so I think sometimes people get a little bit hung up on the downs. In that, they do have a lot of blood, and they can be a little bit hot or a little bit anxious because of where they've come from. But I think on this, when the shoe's on the other foot, they have a lot of pluses that you forget about once you get another young horse that hasn't been through that experience.
Yeah, definitely. And so, what's next for you? So you've got a couple of young horses. You don't have anything off the track at the moment, but what are your plans sort of for the next year coming?
So I've got some young horses at the moment. So I purchased a stock horse mare who has thoroughbred blood on the dam side, and have been breeding her. So we've been crossing her with warm bloods. So we've been ending up with warm blood stock horse cross. It's been a really interesting experiment, I guess, in terms of breeding. So I'm riding some of those young horses at the moment, which they're really cool. So it's really cool having a horse right from the start and knowing their whole history and their whole upbringing and everything, and watching them grow. Because one of the young horses that I've got, she was really sick when she was born, and missed her colostrum and didn't have any milk and ended up really dehydrated because she was premature, so she was tiny, and she spent the first week of her life at the vets. And so it's cool now, she's 4 turning 5, just to see the horse that she's matured into, and knowing that background. But I'm always sort of keeping my eye open for something off the track. It's definitely really hard, trying to find something that ticks all the boxes for eventing. But they're always out there. You just sort of got to keep your eye open for them.
And especially, I guess, now that you've had Murphy, that pretty big shoes to fill for another off the tracker to step into.
Yeah.
So, after him.
Yeah, exactly. The standard's right up here somewhere.
Yeah, I think we've reached just over an hour now, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I really appreciate the time you set aside to have a chat and tell us all about Murphy. I know I won't see you at Adelaide this year because it's not happening, but definitely next time you're over, it'd be great to catch up again. And yeah, I really appreciate the time and everything you've shared. I think everyone can get something out of hearing people's journeys with their off the trackers, and it's a bit reassuring to know that most of them do have quirks, and everyone struggles with the, the little idiosyncrasies that they come with, but it is worth it.
Oh yeah, it is definitely worth it. And they all come with their quirks. I think it's just a matter of figuring out how you fit around their quirks to make them work for you. And then everyone gets along. So But it makes you appreciate the next horse that doesn't have that quirk. But they've always, everyone's got something, so they've always got something different. But yeah,
That's very
thanks
true.
for having me.
No worries. Thanks, Tegan.